What I saw with Springsteen is that his encounters with death and grief were the most real experiences of his life. In the moments of grief and loss, our senses are heightened. This was my experience in the 24-hour period as my late wife departed this life. Every moment has been encased in my mind. Other experiences come and go. Even times of incredible joy and laughter do not seem to have the same neural impact as what we encounter when we lose a loved one. I would go so far as to say that our response to death can define how we live. I'm not saying this as a professional psychologist, but as someone who has experienced and processed grief and loss of many kinds. But more than that, since I began writing and speaking about death and grief, I've seen that so many people are stuck. Or they have created a narrative to help them cope, which is divorced from the truth of Scripture. Others press the grief down into the recesses of their heart and simply don't have a mechanism to help them deal with it, let alone find grace and healing. U2 frontman Bono lost his mum when he was a teenager. He writes frankly about the impact this and other griefs had upon him in his autobiography, Surrender. He draws this conclusion: something in me understands that until we deal with the most traumatic traumas, there's a part of us that stays at that age at which we encountered them. I'm writing this book to help you find a pathway to become unstuck. Although drawing from my own experiences, I am ultimately going to be pointing you to the Bible as the primary medium through which we can mature as believers, even through times of incredible suffering. My desire is for you to be able to face the traumatic reality of the grief you are experiencing and discover that God's love and power can sustain you. It seems to me that Christians give mixed messages when talking about death. We either super spiritualize it and focus on the eternal hope we have at the expense of recognizing the trauma that death does bring. Ultimately, this can be an avoidance mechanism that prevents us from dealing with the grief of losing a loved one. Or we slump into despair, even to the extent of questioning our faith and the goodness of God. The biblical perspective is not an either-or, but far more nuanced, holding these two extremes, super spiritualization and despair, in tension. The biblical perspective lies somewhere in the murkier space of balancing the hope we have that Jesus has conquered death with the reality that death is a brutal invasion into our lives, one that God never intended for us.